a number of individuals. I will not introduce everybody here today, but after I speak, you'll be hearing from two individuals, Terry Carroll from Hillard Church and Colleen Knurk. Colleen will be reading a statement from a survivor who unfortunately cannot be here in person, but a statement will be read on their behalf. And other advocates and members of Hillard Church are here today, and we greatly appreciate their presence and their work. I'm also joined by a number of members from my legal team. First, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Beneski, Complex Litigation Division Chief Jeff Rupert, Assistant Attorneys General Nathan Bays, Jess Erickson, July Simpson, Paralegal Robin Ramirez, and Policy Analyst Lauren Loss. You may be hearing from Kristen Beneski and Nathan later on if there are questions that relate to the legal case. We believe the public is entitled to the information that we are requesting. We have sent subpoenas to all three Washington dioceses. Those, of course, are the Seattle Archdiocese, the Diocese of Spokane, and the Diocese of Yakima. So far, all three have refused to cooperate. The process has reached a stage with the Seattle Archdiocese that now requires us to go to court to seek the documents. And we are seeking a court order requiring them to turn over those documents. I want to emphasize it is unusual for my team to have to go before a judge to compel an entity that we're investigating to turn over documents. Again, our investigations are not public. Part of the reason why I have that policy, and that policy predates my time as Attorney General, is to allow an entity that we're investigating to give us documents and have that conversation outside a public conversation. But once in a while, an entity refuses to provide any documents to us. It's unusual, it does happen, and that is why we have to proceed to go to court. We have not yet taken the same action as the other two dioceses at this point, but we're prepared to do so. There are some legal steps that have to take place first before we can do that. I hope that they turn over the documents. I'm not optimistic. If they do not, we'll be taking the same action with those two dioceses later on. Washington State needs a public accounting of childhood sexual abuse by members of the clergy. All survivors deserve to be heard, and we believe the truth will help survivors heal and help bring them closure. If our investigation reveals any violation of the law, we will, of course, take all steps in our power to seek justice. Survivors with information to share with us should call our office. We encourage you to do so. We have a dedicated line set up for people to leave messages. That number is 833-952-6277. I'll briefly talk about our action today, and then we'll turn it over to our two other speakers, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. We're very grateful for organizations supporting and advocating for survivors of childhood sexual abuse for working with us on this investigation. At the center of these conversations has been the desire that people of faith have to bring daylight to allegations of sexual abuse and efforts to cover up that abuse. The Catholic Church has in recent years made a number of reports about clergy sexual abuse, including publicizing the names of current and former priests that the Church itself determined to have been credibly accused of sexual abuse. There's an obvious issue there. The determination has been made only by the Church, or from committees working only with information that the Church provides. The Church has more information than is shared with the public. It has released names, but has not released its files on these abusive priests, known as red files. The purpose of our investigation is to uncover whether the Church has misused charitable trust funds to cover up systemic sexual abuse and shield abusive priests. If so, we want to understand the extent of the abuse, who those priests are, what the Church's role was in protecting them and keeping them in positions of power, and what's being done now to protect children and ensure that this never happens again. Our objective, simply put, is to daylight these findings. This is about the Church's responsibility as an institution for the abuse that took place and the public's right to that information. We sent our first subpoenas last summer. The dioceses have not responded with any information that's not already made public. I'll make it very clear. We've received no information that has not already been made available to the public. That is not good enough. We sent a second round of subpoenas this spring. The Seattle Archdiocese refused to respond at all. Instead, it's trying to hide behind legal exemptions. And that's why we're filing our motion today in King County Superior Court to enforce our subpoena and compel the Archdiocese of Seattle to comply with it. As some of you know, other attorneys general have had similar investigations. I believe that approximately 23 state attorneys general, including Washington, have public investigations into the Catholic Church. In recent years, we believe 9 states, AG offices, have produced reports detailing their findings. Other AGs, of course, have investigations like ours that continue to be ongoing. Importantly, we have seen in other states that even where various Catholic dioceses voluntarily disclose lists of priests who were credibly accused of sexual assault, attorneys general investigations later revealed a dramatically greater number of credible allegations. I'll give you an example. The Illinois Attorney General published its report just last year. In that report, the Illinois Attorney General listed more than 4 times as many substantiated child sex abusers than the Diocese of Illinois had previously disclosed. The church had disclosed 103. The report that came out of the investigation by the Attorney General in Illinois revealed that number to be 451. One thing I want to emphasize is that many of my colleagues around the country have tools to proceed with investigations that we don't have. Every state AG has different powers to enforce the law in different ways. There's no exception here. So as an example, many other attorneys general have the use of grand jury investigations to produce information. That is an authority that I do not have as Attorney General here in Washington State. I cannot convene a grand jury like some of my colleagues in other states. I do have civil authority. That's a tool that we have, and when we're having press conference like this, it's often because of civil tools that we have. And we're using those tools to seek information regarding clergy sexual abuse in Washington State. I won't go into great detail about the legal side of this because at this point we're simply requesting documents, but I'll briefly just say that the 3 Catholic dioceses in Washington State are organized as a special type of corporation under Washington State law that holds assets in trusts for religious and charitable purposes. We believe that those trust funds may have been misused to instead conceal sexual abuse of Washingtonians. For example, we know about one priest, Father Michael J. Cody, who abused dozens of children in horrifying ways. And the Seattle Archdiocese knew about it for decades. But instead of doing anything to stop it, they let him continue working and moved him from parish to parish, giving him access to more unsuspecting victims and communities who had no reason not to trust him. We believe that if the church used trust funds in the course of this cover-up, that would violate the Charitable Trust Act. The Charitable Trust Act gives my office oversight over organizations that hold assets in trust for charitable or religious purposes, but it includes an exemption for religious corporations. Those exemptions are appropriate. There should be separation of church and state. And this investigation is not about second-guessing the church's use of funds for legitimate religious or charitable purposes. That said, sexual abuse of children is obviously not a religious or charitable purpose. That exemption does not apply to them. The Seattle Archdiocese is refusing to comply with our subpoenas on the grounds that the Charitable Trust Act exemption shields them from this investigation. We believe they are wrong. An exemption is unconstitutional if it is applied in a way that forecloses any possibility of investigating the use of charitable dollars to cover up very serious abuse. The hearing that we are requesting before the court is Wednesday, May 22nd. That's entirely up to the judge to decide whether the hearing takes place on that date, but that is a date that we are requesting for a hearing and an oral argument. Under the current court schedule, the church will be required to respond to our legal filing next week. So with that, I'm going to turn to Terry Carroll, and then Colleen will follow Terry, and then I'll look forward to taking any questions that you have. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Brother. Good morning. My name is Terrence Carroll, and I'm here on behalf of healourchurch.org. Healourchurch.org briefly was formed several years ago to encourage the type of transparency that the Attorney General has talked about. We also are interested in issues involving the laity and marginalized groups in our church. but our focus when we started was on the very records that the Attorney General has just addressed. As you might expect, we strongly support the Attorney General's investigation into the Catholic diocese in our state regarding the ongoing clergy sexual abuse scandal. For too long, the faithful have been kept in the dark regarding the how and the why of this sordid chapter in church history. Over 4 years ago, we approached the Archbishop of Seattle requesting the establishment of an independent Truth and Reconciliation Commission with full access to the records that the Attorney General was seeking, yet mindful of the privacy interests of the victims and survivors. We were completely stonewalled. Instead, the state's public attorney now has initiated a review of records that should have been made known to the church family and survivors of abuse years ago. As we have believed at Heal Our Church for years, a question arises: what entity purporting to represent the teaching of our Lord would not welcome the idea of truth and reconciliation unless there was something to hide or protect? We call on the church and its legal representatives to cooperate fully with the investigation by granting full access to all relevant records, including internal chancery memos, attorney correspondence, and financial information. Church members and survivors deserve no less. And it is critical that the chips fall where they may with any conclusions of the Attorney General in their investigation. This is essential for our church to heal and move on, knowing that we have been told the whole truth with the understanding that steps have been taken to ensure that this will not happen again. This is not an easy thing to do. Those of us who are Catholics and the supporters behind me in the main were born and raised into this church. We love this church. But in loving that church, we have to make sure that the transparency that the faithful are entitled to is put forward. We regret that this step by the Attorney General has been found to be necessary. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you to the Attorney General and his talented team. I am honored to read a statement to you from my colleague and a founding member of Heal Our Church. Her name is Esther Lucero Minor. She couldn't join us this morning. She's in New Mexico. So she asked that I offer this statement in her behalf and behalf of other survivors, and I honestly hope I can do justice to it. I'm a member of Heal Our Church. As a Latina, the gift of my faith is an inheritance from the generations of my elders who believed in God. The depth of their faith flows in my veins. However, I am also a survivor of clerical sexual abuse, and because of the abuse too often and for too many years, I felt unclean, ugly, rejected, and unworthy because of what was done to me. Like too many other women and men too, I experienced sexual abuse at the hands of a priest, my Catholic pastor. This experience left me feeling estranged from my God. At the time, I questioned, where was God when a person who I should have been able to trust treated me in a sinful, hurtful, abusive way? How could I follow a God who allowed such unspeakable things to happen to me? I continue to painfully live with the memory of what this priest did to me. The clerical abuse wounded my spirit and sent my faith into a tailspin, and my trust in God was terribly shaken. For 50 years or so, I believed that family and friends in the community would believe and defend the priest. I was terrified of being labeled and becoming an outcast, so I kept quiet. For too long, I felt estranged from my community of faith. I was reticent to go to church because I did not trust that I would be safe in what should be a holy and sacred place. The abuse engulfed my life. For me, the struggle is not over. As with any significant injury, the pain of the incident never completely goes away. So what is it that prevents total healing from the insidiousness of the sin of clerical sexual abuse? The main obstacle is clericalism. Merriam-Webster defines clericalism, quote, a policy of maintaining or increasing the power of a religious hierarchy. There needs to be an acknowledgement that protecting abusers is being an accomplice to the crime of clerical sexual abuse, whether the abuse was or is to a child, or to an adult, to a boy, or to a girl, to a man, or to a woman. Abuse is abuse, abuse, abuse. There also needs to be transparency, including an openness to locked up records, a willingness to meet face-to-face with the survivors. For all these reasons, I strongly support the investigation by the Attorney General into the Catholic Diocese of Washington State. It is long overdue, in my opinion, and will be an important step in the healing that our church deserves. Again, these are the words of Esther Lucero Minor. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry and Colleen. Just a final word before opening up to any questions that folks have. Terry mentioned that this is difficult for Catholics. Obviously, some of you know I'm Catholic. I'm from a large Catholic family, and St. Anne's is the parish that I grew up in, which we're very close to. I want to be very clear. I was an altar boy. All my siblings graduated from St. Anne's grade school. It's to say that the church is a big part of my life would be a dramatic understatement. Some of the most formative experiences of my life took place in the church. The baptism of my children, funeral for my parents. Any Catholic knows that, right? And so, that said, what the church is doing by withholding these documents is not right. It's wrong. And I don't speak much about my faith publicly, but, to me, my understanding of my faith is that what the church is doing is inconsistent with the teachings of Jesus. And that, as a Catholic, is so disturbing to me on a very deep level. So, I had a conversation with my siblings last night to give them a heads up that, this conversation was taking place. And, she said, hey, Bob, you're doing the right thing. And I believe that. And I think Catholics believe that. I think the public as a whole believes that as well. It's transparency. The church needs to be transparent about what happened. That conversation will be very, very difficult, to put it quite mildly. And I'm sad that my team has to go before a judge to force the church to provide documents that it has. That is sad to me. And I wish there was another way to resolve this, but there is not. And so I want to be very clear that there is, we're moving forward with or without their cooperation. With that, we look forward to taking any questions that you have. Yeah.
I apologize to the entire room because I came in late.
That's no problem. No problem.
I have sort of a kitchen question.
All right, go for it.
When did this investigation begin? What's the number of victims you identified so far? What's the number of priests that you are, I guess, are on your suspect list? And I guess that's essentially it.
Yeah.
I'm asking for the timetable and the scope of the investigation.
Sure. So in terms of information related, so the question was multifaceted. So for those on the line, but kind of ask, hey, how many priests do we think are involved? When did the investigation start? Is kind of a group of questions. What I'll say is that we don't have any information that's not already publicly available. I want to be clear about that. So we've asked for additional information. files that the church has, they have not provided those to us. So we have nothing additional in terms of number of priests or any of those details that's not already publicly available. So obviously we're going to court to compel them to turn over additional information that would shed more light on what's happened. Number two, the investigation formalized. We sent subpoenas to the Archdiocese last summer, I want to say. Is that right? Last summer. Obviously, there was work and thought going on before that time, obviously, with the legal team and thinking about what a case would look like, legal theories, that type of thing. That's normal. But it was formalized that was sent to the Archdiocese last summer.
What sparked this investigation? Essentially, I'm asking for, you sent us this email last summer, but something had to pop up and say, hey, I want records from three.
Sure. So the question is, what sparked the investigation? I mean, like a lot, it's not unusual that there are sometimes multiple things that are going on that generate investigation. For this situation, obviously, there's been a public conversation, as you well know, nationally and here in Washington State, around abuse within the Catholic Church and priests. So it's an issue that obviously I was aware of, number one. Number two, we've had conversations with some of the folks who are here today about their concerns about not getting information from the church that they've requested. Number three, there's obviously a legal component to this. Like I mentioned in my remarks, well, when you're here, that I don't have certain powers that other AGs have, where they can go convene a grand jury, for example, to get information. So obviously there's time spent looking at the law, looking at the church, and looking at our ability to seek that information from the church. There was a significant state Supreme Court case, for example, a few years ago that clarified the law in a way that we think is important when it comes to charitable trusts. So without getting too much in the legal weeds on that, we're obviously paying attention to the law and what the law is saying. So I'd say it's a combination of things that brought us to the point we're at today.
Okay, have you talked to any victims? Essentially, what I'm trying to pin you down on is the other actual complaints from people saying that sexual abuse, as opposed to just a general suspicion.
So I'm not sure I'm tracking the question. So
Have you had specific complaints from victims? Essentially, the nuance I'm trying to get out of you is this just a general suspicion of, gee, we need to check up on those dioceses to see what they're up to, or you have actual complaints from actual victims that's part of the investigation?
yeah, I guess I won't get sort of details of complaints that folks filed, but the church, what I just will say is the church, it is clear that the church has more records. We believe we're entitled to those records. We believe the public's entitled to see those records, and that a report be issued, much like has happened in states like Illinois, for example. So my authority is civil, not criminal in nature, right, as I mentioned before, and so that's our focus at this time. Joe?
So are you seeking documents for all clergy members, just to see what exists on each clergy member?
So I'll turn to my team on sort of the specifics of the subpoena that we issued. So this is Kristen Mineski who will speak to that specifically.
Sure. So we're seeking information about all clergy members, everyone who was affiliated with the church and under the church's purview when this abuse occurred.
And how many years, decades are you looking back?
We're looking back several decades. We want a full public accounting of the abuse that has occurred.
Can you go higher up than the church higher? Or does it stop at the archdiocese?
Sorry, say one more time now.
Can you, because you're being forwarded and getting these documents from the three archdioceses, can you?
Right.
I mean, I don't think that.
Oh, I see. I see. I guess what I'd say in answer to that question is we have a clear path here in using Washington state law, right, where we go to a judge, there's a process for that, and a judge will make a determination whether these records must be turned over to us or not. It's infrequent that we do that, but when we do that, a judge typically agrees with us, right, that we have broad investigatory tools and powers under the law to obtain documents. Look, if a judge disagrees with us, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it in terms of looking at other options. But right now, we believe we have good legal arguments and are optimistic that the judge will agree with us and will compel the church to provide those documents.
And going back to the gentleman's question about how many suspects or victims have you identified, you said everything you have is publicly available, but how many is that?
Well, that's, I mean, I'm not sure if someone has Tara, I'm not sure if you were calling one. Yeah, I think the question was, hey, how many priests have been identified by the Archdiocese publicly already?
83.
83 is the answer. Yeah, but again, that is, just want to be clear, we've received nothing that is not publicly available, that has been essentially reported, right? That what we are seeking is additional information that the church has and that they're not disclosing. So the whole point of this, I mean, I understand the questions, which, hey, how many are right? How many priests are there? You want to know what the public wants to know, right? And we don't have those answers for a very simple reason. The church is not providing that to us, and we believe they must. So that's why this is a little bit unusual, right? Typically, we do an investigation, and entity provides documents to us. That happens every day around here. This is unusual in that the church is saying, no, we're not going to give you a single document that is not already public, not a single one. So I want to be clear about that, right? Not a single document, and that's why we have to go to a court to get those documents. If we get those documents, that's a different conversation down the road about making that information public, so the public can determine the extent of the abuse, just like happened in Illinois, right? Where a report shed much greater information about the extent of the abuse in Illinois that had been made publicly available by the church prior to their investigation.
Did you say you've uncovered any evidence, new evidence that would warrant criminal charges at any point?
So I want to be clear, we have no information that's already been made public. Just want to, I can't say that enough times, right? I mean, if we did, we would tell you, but we do not have that. I do want to say, I know there are probably some folks on the phone, and I know it's always a little tricky to question the phone with multiple voices, but if you have a question, if you don't mind identifying yourself and who you're with first, that'd be great, and we'll do our best to answer your question.
This is Gene Johnson with the Associated Press.
Hi, Gene.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure can. Go right ahead.
So on that, I kind of following up on that last point you were making, can you talk about what authority you would have to make any criminal referrals to local prosecutors based on information you might eventually find? And can you talk about what other possible outcomes there are of your investigation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I guess.
In other words, are there other lawsuits or steps that the state could take because if you can prove the misuse of charitable trust funds, etc.
Yeah, I guess on the second question, I'm just not going to speculate this time, right? Our job right now, this would typically be sort of early stage investigation. We ask for documents are provided, then we reach some conclusions around those documents, right? We don't have them right now. So I really don't want to speculate before we see those documents, number one. Number two, in terms of criminal referrals, we don't, as I mentioned before, the AG's office in Washington State does not have criminal authority. We don't do criminal referrals. The way it actually works is local prosecutors, right, for violations of state criminal law, they have that authority. They can refer cases to us, right? In other words, the King County prosecutor, we're in downtown Seattle right now, can and sometimes does refer criminal cases to my criminal team. They can give us their criminal authority to take on a criminal case, and we do that all across the state of Washington. So just want to be clear that my authority is civil in nature. Our objective is to obtain the documents that the church has that they are not disclosing, and to provide information to the public. And at that point, there may be decisions that flow from that, but right now we simply need to get the documents first. Other questions from those on the phone?
Okay. Hi, my name is Peter Isley. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by a priest when I was a child. I'm also a member of the Catholic Accountability Project in Washington State. First of all, I want to thank you, Attorney General, for doing this. As a victim and so many victims have suffered so much, I can't tell you what it means to finally have the chief law enforcement person in Washington State to back us, to be behind us, and to be with us in our long journey for justice. I have two very quick questions. One, have you subpoenaed religious orders for documents? As you know, religious orders Pope Francis. Pope Francis has lifted papal secrecy several years ago in all cases involving criminal and civil investigations. And I'm wondering if you have been in contact with the U.S. Ambassador Joseph Donnelly to the Holy See and are working with him to let Pope Francis know about what the bishops are doing in Washington State, because Pope Francis can order them to cooperate with you.
So, Peter, thanks for being on the call. Thanks for sharing your experience, and I'm sorry, for what you went through. What I would say is, I'm not prepared to speak about what other actions we are taking or may be taking. Right now, we need to be thoughtful about our approach, and right now our focus is on getting these documents, and we'll be getting a decision from a judge relatively soon on that. I'm confident. To your point about other conversations, appreciate that feedback. My team and I'll talk about that and appreciate it. And if we are unable to get these documents through this judicial proceeding, obviously we'll be looking at other options as well. But appreciate your feedback on both those points. Other questions that folks have? Thank you. Any other questions that folks have on the phone?
Yes, please. My name is Sarah Pearson. I'm a sexual abuse survivor, and I'm also a member of the Catholic Accountability Project. I did want to hear your response, actually, to follow up with Peter's first question. If you could respond to that, and I have another about whether religious orders have been asked to provide these documents or subpoenas, because there's a long list of Jesuits or Irish Christian brothers of offenders who've been in those orders, and oftentimes they're transferred back and forth between those dioceses and religious orders. So that's an important question that we have. And then to follow it up, my question is, will the AG's office commit to protecting whistleblowers or anyone who has information about abuse or institutional concealment and wants to share that with your office? Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen, do you want to maybe take the first part of that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the first part of the question was about whether our investigation is also seeking information from religious orders who are not directly under the purview of the Archdiocese. The answer at this point is we have focused our efforts thus far on the Archdiocese. If a court agrees with us that they have to turn documents over to us, we will analyze that information and follow the trail wherever it leads, consistent with our authority.
And I'm sorry, do you mind repeating your second question that you had? My apologies.
Oh, yes, of course. So my second question is regarding whistleblowers. So, there are many people who perhaps are employed by the church or has some proximity to its actions and activities related to this issue, who may have information about abuse or institutional concealment. Is your office committing to protecting whistleblowers and seeking information from them?
Yes, and so as I think I mentioned, there's a phone number that individuals can contact our office. We encourage individuals to contact our office. I'll repeat that phone number again, and that number is 833-952-6277. 833-952-6277. And we do want to hear from individuals. So just a couple final thoughts, and then I think a number of folks here are happy to chat with you as well and have their own stories. I think that they might be wanting to share as well. Thanks for all the advocates who are here today, but have been with us for some time as we've explored our options and this investigation. Thanks to my legal team for their excellent work on this matter. And to that last question that was asked, we obviously encourage Washingtonians who are willing to share their experience with us. Obviously, you'll be treated with the greatest respect. If you're willing to come forward, I can only imagine how difficult that would be. But if that's something that you're willing to do, we would want to hear from you and welcome that in a way that works best for you. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that there is still time for the church to do the right thing. I can't say I'm optimistic, but there is still time. And I hope whoever's listening, the leadership of the church, really reflects deeply about this. It's never too late to do the right thing. you know, and look, there's a hard way to do this, or there's a much less difficult path. And I just invite the church to do the right thing, to contact my team, to stop the obstruction. And move forward in the way that you heard today, which I think is consistent with our faith as Catholics. You know, the right thing is not always easy. I get that. And I can imagine for the church right now, you know, the right thing is especially painful, especially difficult. I get that. But really, you know, it's time for them to lead by example on this, of what they ask from Catholics, to follow the teachings of Jesus. Honestly, they need to start by doing that. And they have an opportunity here to do the right thing. And I'm just speaking more as a Catholic than as an Attorney General, but I'm personally asking them to do that and to do the right thing and to do it now. Thank you all for being here. We so appreciate it.